For nearly 4,000 years, eunuchs played pivotal roles in some of the most powerful courts across the globe, from the grand palaces of the Egyptian pharaohs to the majestic halls of Chinese emperors, Middle Eastern kings, caliphates, and sultans. These men, who belonged to a unique and often misunderstood social class, were more than just servants. They were confidants, advisors, generals, and at times the true power behind the throne. As eunuchs rose through the ranks, their influence grew, allowing them to become kingmakers, feared for their ability to master the art of court intrigue, manipulate political outcomes, and even control the succession of rulers. Their story is one of paradox and complexity. Though physically altered and often viewed with a mixture of admiration and suspicion, eunuchs managed to navigate the intricate power dynamics of royal courts, amassing power that could rival and sometimes surpass that of the rulers they served. At the height of their influence in imperial China during the Middle Ages, eunuchs became indispensable to the court, though their power often came at a steep cost. Corruption, political meddling, and ruthless elimination of rivals were common as they worked to maintain their positions in the cutthroat world of court politics. The origins of eunuchs can be traced back to the 21st century BC in the Sumerian region of Mesopotamia. Initially, eunuchs served primarily as slaves and servants in the Middle East, playing roles in the Assyrian Empire and early Persian empires. However, as the centuries passed, the value of eunuchs in more elevated positions became increasingly apparent. By the 3rd century BC, particularly in imperial China, eunuchs began to rise in prominence, and their influence would continue to grow over the centuries. Eunuchs became a deeply entrenched and respected social class within royal courts, entrusted with both administrative and domestic responsibilities. In societies where dynastic family rule was paramount, eunuchs were considered ideal for positions requiring absolute loyalty. Their unique status, often enforced by castration, provided them access to the inner workings of the most powerful empires. By the Middle Ages, spanning roughly from the 5th to the 15th century AD, eunuchs had ascended to some of the most powerful positions within these courts, sometimes wielding influence that exceeded even that of the emperor or king. For thousands of years, castration was employed as a method to ensure the unwavering loyalty of slaves, or as a severe punishment for rivals, or those who dared to engage in illicit affairs with the wives of powerful men. In China, however, the practice took on an additional layer of significance. Chinese rulers saw castration as a way to ensure that their servants, now unable to procreate, could be trusted implicitly within the palace. By stripping a man of his ability to father children, rulers felt reassured that these eunuchs would pose no threat of establishing a competing dynasty, while also providing security that their wives and concubines were safe from any advances. The potential favor and career opportunities available to a eunuch in China were so enticing that many young men willingly underwent castration. This drastic step allowed them access to careers in the imperial court that would otherwise have been beyond their reach. The allure of such positions was powerful, as eunuchs could rise to significant influence, becoming key advisors, administrators, and even kingmakers. In contrast, the role of eunuchs in Christian Europe was more complex and multifaceted. Chastity was regarded as a moral ideal, and as a result, eunuchs were often seen in a positive light, regarded as devout, pure, and free from the temptations of the flesh. Some religious figures chose castration as a radical demonstration of their commitment to a sin-free life. Despite this, eunuchs were also viewed with suspicion and sometimes considered immoral due to their lack of what was perceived as essential male qualities. Seen as foreign imports, they were often mistrusted and their roles were generally limited to those of slaves or domestic servants, rarely allowing them to ascend to positions of significant power. However, in other parts of the world, eunuchs held more prominent roles. In the Byzantine and Abbasid empires, for example, men were sometimes castrated to allow them to rise to the positions of generals and religious patriarchs. This was done with the clear intent of preventing them from ever becoming emperor themselves, thus ensuring their loyalty while removing any threat to the ruling dynasty. The status and reputation of eunuchs were marked by complexity and often filled with contradictions. They were simultaneously despised and admired, trusted and mistrusted, weakened by their castration, yet empowered by the unique opportunities that this status afforded them. Their influence in the courts of some of the world's most powerful empires stands as a testament to the intricate and often paradoxical role they played in history. One of the most significant roles eunuchs played was in the Ottoman Empire, where they were deeply embedded in the palace structure, particularly in the management of the harem. The Ottoman harem was not just a space for the sultan's wives and concubines. It was a political institution that wielded considerable influence, and the eunuchs who managed it were some of the most powerful figures in the empire. The most notable of these eunuchs were the Kislar Aga, chief black eunuch, and the Kapu Asu, chief white eunuch. The Kislar Aga, typically of African descent, was the head of the harem and one of the most powerful officials in the empire. He controlled access to the sultan, managed the day-to-day affairs of the harem, and wielded considerable influence over imperial decisions, especially those concerning the succession of the throne. The Kappa Asa, on the other hand, was responsible for the palace's administration and the education of young pages who could rise to significant positions in the government. These eunuchs were more than just palace officials. They were integral to the Ottoman political system. Their unique position allowed them to act as intermediaries between the sultan and his subjects, and their influence extended into areas such as diplomacy and military affairs. Some, like Hadim Suleiman Pasha, a prominent Ottoman eunuch and statesman, even led military campaigns and held high-ranking positions, demonstrating the vast power and influence they could accumulate. However, their power was not without its challenges. The eunuchs in the Ottoman court often found themselves embroiled in court intrigues and power struggles, particularly during periods of succession crises. Their close relationship with the Sultan made them targets of jealousy and resentment from other court factions, leading to frequent conflicts and even assassinations. Despite these dangers, the eunuchs of the Ottoman Empire remained central to the empire's governance until its decline in the 19th century. In the Mughal Empire, eunuchs also held significant positions of power, particularly within the royal court and harem. Known as Khwaja Seras, these eunuchs served as guardians of the harem and held considerable influence over the Mughal rulers. Their responsibilities extended beyond the confines of the harem. They were often involved in administrative duties, acted as advisors to the emperor, and played crucial roles in court ceremonies. One of the most notable eunuchs in Mughal history was Itimad Khan, who served under Emperor Akbar and his successors. Itimad Khan rose to prominence due to his loyalty and administrative skills, eventually becoming one of the most trusted advisors to the emperor. His influence was so great that he was often tasked with important diplomatic missions and the management of imperial finances. The role of eunuchs in the Mughal court was multifaceted. While they were primarily associated with the harem, their involvement in the empire's political and administrative affairs made them key figures in the governance of the state. Their proximity to the emperor and their unique position allowed them to navigate the complex power dynamics of the Mughal court, often acting as kingmakers and power brokers in their own right. A eunuch's daily life varied greatly depending on their geographical location and status within their society. In Europe and the Middle East, a typical eunuch often served as a domestic servant or slave, performing mundane tasks within the ruler's household. Their day might involve making the ruler's bed, assisting with bathing, cleaning the bedchambers, and delivering messages throughout the palace. These roles, though essential, were generally low-ranking and menial. In contrast, eunuchs in imperial China had the opportunity to ascend far beyond the role of a mere servant, potentially amassing significant power and influence. While the Chinese emperor ruled over a vast empire with millions of subjects, he was constantly aware of the ever-present threat of rivals eager to seize power. The ruling dynasty was believed to hold the mandate of heaven, a divine right that justified their rule. This mandate typically ensured that an emperor would rule until his death, at which point one of his sons would usually succeed him. However, with such immense power at stake, backstabbing, conspiracies, and desperate grabs for influence were common within the imperial court. This environment allowed eunuchs to rise in importance within Chinese society. Beginning as a class of slaves in the 6th century, eunuchs evolved into a crucial hierarchy of trusted men who served as servants, administrators, and political advisors. Because they were unable to procreate and thus could not establish a legitimate rival dynasty, emperors trusted their eunuchs implicitly. This trust transformed the eunuch class from one associated with societal shame and emasculation into a desirable career path for many ambitious young men. To gain employment in the imperial palace, castration was a prerequisite, and many young men willingly underwent the procedure. Becoming a eunuch offered not only access to political power and opportunity, but also a significantly improved quality of life within the palace. Over time, eunuchs became a distinct social class, with high-ranking individuals enjoying direct access to the emperor and wielding control over armies, naval fleets, and vast wealth. Those lower in the hierarchy, however, remained common servants within the imperial palace, though still holding trusted positions. A low-ranking eunuch was responsible for the everyday maintenance of palace life. They were entrusted with preparing meals for the imperial family, guarding the emperor's harem, cleaning the palace, participating in construction projects, and carrying the emperor in his wheelless carriage, known as a litter. Spending so much time in close proximity to the emperor and the court, these eunuchs inevitably overheard sensitive information through the messages they carried or private conversations they inadvertently listened to. This access to information made some eunuchs valuable as domestic spies, employed by rivals within the court to gather intelligence. Higher-ranking eunuchs, on the other hand, took on more administrative roles, working directly for the emperor. They relayed important messages, ensured that the emperor's orders were executed, and acted as the emperor's conduit of authority. Their close association with the emperor and their role in carrying out his will granted these eunuchs a measure of power and an aura of significance within society. With the power and status eunuchs gained in the court, they inevitably attracted envy and hatred from their rivals. The position of a eunuch became a complex one. On the one hand, they were seen as trustworthy and loyal, but on the other, they were notorious for their involvement in court intrigue and their willingness to do whatever was necessary to maintain their influence. This duality became especially pronounced during the Tang dynasty, which ruled from the 7th to the 10th centuries, a period when eunuchs reached the pinnacle of their power. Two key incidents illustrate the growing influence and perilous position of eunuchs during this time. In 757, the rebel An Lushan, who sought to overthrow the Tang dynasty and establish his own rule, played a pivotal role in highlighting the dangerous power of eunuchs. Years earlier, An Lushan had castrated a servant, keeping him close as he waged successful rebellions against the Tang. However, as An Lushan grew increasingly cruel and began favoring one son over another, his eunuch was approached by the rejected son and hired to assassinate him. Using his position of trust and his close proximity to An Lushan, the eunuch entered his master's room one evening and fatally stabbed him. Although the rebellion was taken over by An Lushan's son, it was ultimately crushed by the Tang forces. This act of betrayal and intrigue became emblematic of the role eunuchs played in the power struggles of the time. Another significant event occurred several decades later, in 835 AD, known as the Sweet Dew Incident. During this period, the Tang emperor, increasingly resentful of the eunuchs' power, conspired to eliminate them. With the help of his chancellor and top generals, the emperor devised a plan to lure the powerful eunuchs into the open, where they could be ambushed and slaughtered by his army. Although around 10 eunuchs were killed in the initial assault, many managed to escape by carrying the emperor on his litter to safety indoors. The plot's failure led to a dramatic reversal of fortune. The humiliated emperor was subjected to insults and curses by the eunuchs, who then ordered the execution of many officials involved in the conspiracy against them. Over 1,000 officials were killed in the aftermath, and the eunuchs further solidified their grip on power. For the remainder of the Tang dynasty, eunuchs controlled the empire, deciding the succession of emperors in ways that best suited their interests and effectively becoming the de facto rulers of China. Although eunuchs remained a fixture in the Chinese court well into the 20th century, by the time the final dynasty fell, they had largely returned to their original roles as servants. In these later years, they were often mistreated, abused, and maligned, a far cry from the heights of power they once commanded. The decline of eunuchs' influence can be traced to several factors, including changes in political structures, societal attitudes, and the rise of new administrative systems that rendered their roles less relevant. In China, the fall of the Ming dynasty in the 17th century marked the beginning of the end for eunuchs' political power. The Qing dynasty that followed sought to curtail their influence, and by the time of the last Chinese emperor, eunuchs were primarily confined to their traditional roles as servants. In the Ottoman Empire, the gradual decline of the empire itself also led to a reduction in the power of eunuchs. As the empire faced increasing external pressures and internal decay, the once powerful eunuchs of the harem found their influence waning. By the 19th century, the role of eunuchs had diminished significantly, and with the fall of the empire after World War I, their presence in the court came to an end. Similarly, in other parts of the world, the rise of modern nation-states and the decline of feudal systems contributed to the phasing out of eunuchs from positions of power. The emergence of new administrative systems, professional bureaucracies, and meritocratic principles left little room for the unique roles that eunuchs had traditionally occupied. The legacy of eunuchs has been a source of fascination and intrigue in popular culture, with their stories often portrayed in literature, film, and television. These portrayals have significantly shaped modern perceptions of eunuchs, often highlighting the paradoxical nature of their lives. At once powerful and powerless, trusted yet mistrusted, respected but also feared. In literature, eunuchs have been depicted as both villains and tragic figures. The character of Varus in George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series and its television adaptation Game of Thrones is a prime example of the eunuch archetype in modern storytelling. Varus is portrayed as a master of intrigue and espionage, wielding significant influence behind the scenes. Yet his motivations and loyalties are often ambiguous, reflecting the historical eunuch's duality of trust and suspicion. Historically, eunuchs have also appeared in classic literature, such as in the works of Shakespeare, where they are often portrayed as figures of wisdom or cunning. These portrayals, while dramatized, are rooted in the real historical roles that eunuchs played in the courts of kings and emperors. In film and television, eunuchs are frequently depicted as either the scheming court official or the loyal servant, reflecting the dichotomy of their historical roles. However, these portrayals often simplify the complex lives of eunuchs, reducing them to stereotypes rather than exploring the full depth of their experiences. The story of eunuchs is one of paradox and power. For nearly 4,000 years, they played essential roles in some of the most powerful courts in history, navigating the complex social and political structures that defined their societies. From their origins as slaves and servants to their rise as trusted advisors and power brokers, eunuchs left an indelible mark on history. Their legacy is marked by contradictions. They were both admired and despised, trusted and mistrusted, empowered by their unique status, yet limited by the very same condition that granted them access to the halls of power. In some societies, they were revered for their loyalty and ability to serve without personal ambition. In others, they were feared for their cunning and influence. As we reflect on the history of eunuchs, we see a group of individuals who, despite the physical and social limitations imposed upon them, managed to carve out significant roles in the annals of history. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. No castration required.